So as we discussed in the overview, we're after two things here in this lesson. And the first one is we want to go ahead and we want to make a correction, kind of course correct our header a little bit. And what we want to correct here is, if you watch in our 102 step, when we scroll up and we shrink, our menu actually expands. It's not exactly what we want it to happen. It's not all that horrible, but it definitely does not look good, and we can see with deeper menus that they tend to scroll off the screen, not really what we want. And so with that, you'll see the other thing we're working on when I refresh this. We're going to add a little bit of a loader into our screen to let the user know when something's going on, and we'll learn a little more about that when we touch it. But also, as we correct our menu, we'll see how simple it was actually to correct our menu and to get that back on course. So that'll be awesome. So let's go ahead and let's go after fixing the menu first. First thing we want to do is go into our local host that we're working in, make sure that everything is working. It's exactly as we would expect it. We're going to address this first, the the menu loading. Pretty easy, straightforward thing to fix, but if you don't know, could drive you nuts trying to figure it out. What we do know is that inside our header, we're running a script against it, and what's happening is in our JavaScript, it is actually calling. If we look in here, it's actually reassigning classes, and it's basically telling classes to swap out when it hits a certain point, as we saw in our script out on our page. And if we look in our page, I'm going to go ahead and actually open up our index.html. And if we take a peek in here, we see that it's called nav. And we can see in our app.js, let me get that open. And our app.js is where we're actually calling it. And we're telling it to apply a class called smaller. So that gives us a clue of what we're looking for. We know it's a class, and we know it's called smaller, and therefore we have the opportunity to kind of narrow that down, and we can go, and we know that we pulled the header in with the header-resize.css, which is why we left it separate for now. Because of the fact that we want to be able to troubleshoot it faster and find things, and we'll bring it all together at one point, but right now won't be the time. So we can see that we have our header, and our header is all laid out in here, size, everything like that, and then we have our header smaller. Well, our header smaller tells it to go to a height of 75. The other thing that's happening is it's telling it to expand the links to a height of 75. They're at 32 right now. So we know, because it's pointing to the header and the smaller class, which gets assigned when it reduces in size, nav A, which is our anchor tags, our links. Let's go ahead and let's clean this up first. Apply source formatting, makes it a lot easier to read. So header smaller nav A, right? So what we want to do, and when we're doing it in coding and we're changing things like this, it's usually better to, instead of completely delete it for now in development mode, that we go ahead and we comment it out, line height, and what we're going to set that to is 32. Now hopefully, if I'm right, that'll fix the whole problem, because what's happening is when that smaller class is getting applied, it's actually expanding the link itself rather than even shrinking it, which we don't want it to do that either. So I went ahead and I saved that, so I'm going to go back out here to localhost, and of course I'm going to clear my cache, make sure that my console's open so I can see any errors that take place, and we can see that we refresh with no errors. And now when I scroll up, my menu stays exactly the way I want it to. I scroll all the way down to the bottom of the footer to make sure that I did not impact anything else below. No errors are coming, and it was that simple to fix that issue of the expanding menu. You run into these things and you start to learn how to figure out how to get to them and how to adjust for them. But that takes care of that. So that adjustment was in the header-resize.css. And what we were looking for is the header.smaller nav A. And we're taking it from 75 to 32. All right, excellent. So that takes care of our first objective in this lesson. Our second objective now is to actually go, and if we look at our sample, if you watch carefully, and it'll be very brief, but what we want to do is you can see gears come up in here and then they disappear. This is basically a great way of communicating to the user that something's happening and we need them to wait, and also it allows us to control some things, as we'll see as we start to enter this in. So we're going to start with our index page, because all the gears is a div with a background URL in it. And the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of the body, because we want it to sit over top of everything. So when this div, and we're giving it an ID of loaderDiv, and it's just an empty div. And what we're doing by putting it down here is we're giving it a position to be able to be moved around, which is what we're going to do with our CSS. And we're going to overlay the entire page with this div. And if we hit save and we go out and we look now, we're not going to see anything. Let's go to our localhost. And we don't see anything right now. We don't even see where it's sitting, because it's all the way at the bottom of the page under the footer. But what we can do with this div is, now that we have it sitting there, we can go ahead out to our style sheet. And we can do all the magic we want for that div inside the style sheet. So I'm going to copy and paste my code. And then we'll give you a chance to, of course, to pause and a good shot of the code so that you know how to get it. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this new rule in. And while we're in here, let's go ahead and clean this up before we do anything else. Excellent. So what we're doing is we're calling an ID. The ID is loaderDiv. And we're pulling a background image from a secure space that's out there on the internet. And we're going to go ahead and we're going to just steal this for now. And essentially what we have here is, you can see the cogs turning in the example. We're telling it not to repeat. We're telling it to center vertically and horizontally and stay in place. So in other words, lay over top and just stay there. We're reiterating that with that. We're giving it a z-index because the z-index is what basically allows for it to be arranged, right? Front, back, kind of like working in layers. And we're telling it to go ahead and pop over top of everything else. And actually, I think we're going to go with 9999 on this. We're telling the div to put its top left corner in the top left corner of the window. And we're telling it to put its bottom right corner in the bottom right corner of the window. So in other words, it's stretching out over the entire window. We're going to give it an opacity of 0.025 because we just want it to be very subtle. And then our background size, it's something you can play with. I came up with 120 because that just seemed to be the best fit for the image that we're pulling in. And then we're giving it a background color, so we give it kind of that modal overlay feel to it. So I'm going to save that, and we're going to go out here, and we're going to do a refresh on our localhost. And now what we're going to see is we can see that our div is populated with the gears loading in the background. And we can actually scroll yet the content, but what we can't do is interact with it as far as clicking, which is exactly what we want, because when we're loading content to our page, we want to prevent the user from being able to just jump around and instantiate more code, and we want the code to process cleanly. And so we'll see how we handle that in a minute here. But what we want to make sure that we do is, once the page is fully loaded, is get rid of the div, is allow the user to interact with the code. The way that we do this is we do it through JavaScript. So this was in our index in our CSS page. So far we've made changes. We added the loaderDiv to the index page. We've come into our CSS and we put our loaderDiv in, and we're going to make one more change here. And what that change is going to be is we're going to come into our func init, and we're going to go right in here. And what we want is after the nav has been loaded, we want for that div to disappear. So what we do is we use a jQuery, get element by ID, so it's getting the div, and then we're going to use a jQuery animated function, and we're going to tell it to do it slowly, to fade it out slowly. So now, when we come in and we refresh our page, we see it come, and then we see it disappear, and it gives us our functionality to do what we want. The only other thing that we need to do is, what if their JavaScript engine is not running, or there's a JavaScript error and it leaves that div lay up there and our people cannot move about our application. We need to make sure that that is not the case. And the way that we do that is we actually can come in to our index.html file, and right below the loader, what we're going to do is we're going to say, we're going to put some script in, and we're going to tell it to fade in slowly, just like we told it to fade out. And the reason we're going to tell it to fade in slowly is because we're actually going to go into CSS now and tell it not to display that div by default. So if I go into my styles, we're going to say display none. So what does that mean? What does that do? Well, display none, if we go back into our source code, probably should have waited to do this for a minute, because I'll show you here real quick. I'm going to take that back out for a minute so that we can go out here and take a look. And now if we refresh, we didn't see it at all. And that's what we want to happen if their JavaScript is broken. And actually, if their JavaScript's broken, pretty much our whole web app is broken, but we're just trying to learn best practices here. By putting this in, what we're doing is we're telling it to display it. And then, once the menu is loaded, we're telling it to fade it out. So if I comment this out, and I save that, and we come out and we look, so it told it to display it. We're right back where we were. And now we want it to hide away when nothing's happening. And we'll use this over and over in our site. So we're going to save that. We'll come out here. And now if we do it, we might see it briefly. And there we go. That's exactly what we wanted. So as a quick overview about the changes, I want to just quickly go over the changes. We went into our first thing we did was went in and made an adjustment in our header-resize.css file, and the adjustment that we made was to the style that affects the nav bar on small, and we can see that's right here. And we just updated the height. That's all, the line height. Then we came into our index.html page and we added in the loaderDiv. And that's actually what grabs the image. And then we went into style and we gave that some styling. And here's where we're pulling the background image from. This is really not a good habit to do, but it's just an example to show you the boundaries and how you can pull images, not just from your site, but you can pull them from all over. Got to be careful when you're doing that, though. It can be kind of disrespectful. We learn a little bit about setting position fixed and keeping the div where we want it, overlaying the entire page, giving it a z-index, and a little bit of a background color, and using opacity to basically show a kind of that overlay feel. And then we set it to display none, so it would not display automatically right away in case JavaScript was broken, which is why we came in here and we actually said loaderDiv fade in slow, so that if JavaScript is working, the minute that this loaderDiv is loaded into the browser, we can call it and tell it to display. Once we've done that, we go through, and on the complete window load, the init function is called. The init function goes and grabs the menu data. It comes through and it builds the menu, and then it appends the menu. And once the menu is done and loaded, it goes ahead and removes that loaderDiv for us so that we're able to interact with the page and not have that overlaying our page. Excellent. So at this point, we'll go ahead, close that up, commit. So let's do a git status, and we can see everything that has changed. Index.html, app.js, style.js, and header-resize.css, and style.css. Said that incorrectly. So let's go ahead and add, git add. So we're going to add our changes, and then we'll do git commit, and we'll put a message in there, and we'll say added loader to the index.html. Spelled that wrong. Dynamically display it once it has been loaded, period. As soon as the page has completed loading in full, we remove the div and allow for page interactions. Excellent. So let's go ahead. Probably a couple spelling errors in there. I'm not the best speller. And at this point, we'll do another git status. And we are good to go. So I'll see you in our next video, and we'll go ahead and merge and push to production.